I stood before the mirror in the bridal salon, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at me. The white lace bodice clung perfectly to my frame. The long train spilled across the polished floor like a river of snow, and for a fleeting moment, I felt like the princess I had once dreamed of being. My mother's reflection appeared behind me, her hands warm as she adjusted the veil. "Claire, you look exactly the way you imagined when you were little," she whispered. Her voice carried both pride and the faint tremor of a woman about to give her daughter away. I smiled, remembering myself at 10 years old, draping old curtains over my shoulders and declaring that one day I would marry a prince. Back then it was just a fantasy, a fairy tale I told myself at sleepovers. Now standing there in that gown, I wanted to believe Jacob Whitfield was that prince. For 3 years, he had been steady, attentive, every bit the man my parents admired. He never missed a holiday dinner, always brought flowers, always shook my father's hand with confidence. To them, he was the perfect match. To me, he was the man who had promised to make me the happiest woman alive. As the seamstress pinned the final hem, my mother clasped my hands. "Tomorrow, you'll be the most beautiful bride in Savannah," she said. Her eyes glistened as though she saw not just the dress, but the years of hope she had poured into me. I pressed my palms against my chest, trying to steady the thundering rhythm of my heart. I told myself it was only joy, the overwhelming anticipation of a life about to begin. On the ride home, we went through the list one more time. Flowers delivered, cake ready, musicians confirmed, the restaurant set for 40 guests. My mother ticked each item off with the practiced air of someone who had planned every detail down to the last napkin. "And the honeymoon?" she asked with a teasing smile. I laughed. Jacob had insisted on keeping that part of surprise. Something unforgettable he had promised, and I clung to that word like a charm. Everything was in place. The town was already buzzing with talk of the wedding, of how the Mitchells and Whitfields would finally be joined. Yet, as I watched the familiar streets roll by through the car window, a ripple of unease moved through me. Nothing had gone wrong, not a single flaw in months of preparation, and still my hands trembled. Too perfect, my mind whispered. Too seamless to be real. I shook the thought away quickly, forcing a laugh. All brides get nervous, I told myself out loud, ignoring the cold flicker that had settled deep in my chest. Tomorrow was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and I wanted so desperately to believe it would be. Back at home, I carefully hung the gown in my closet, letting the soft silk brush against my fingers one last time before I closed the door. Tomorrow, that dress would carry me to the altar. My mother was in my room, folding linens into the cedar chest that had been set aside for me since childhood. "Claire," she said gently, "are you truly ready for married life?" I laughed a little too quickly. "Mom, Jacob and I have talked about everything. He wants children, and so do I. We'll live in his apartment until we can buy a bigger place. It will all work out." She nodded, pleased, and then reminded me of what my father had prepared. The downtown condo already signed over in my name, the new car waiting in the driveway, the savings set aside to help us start. It was the kind of diary every family in Savannah whispered about, and I knew she mentioned it with pride. But hearing it out loud made something twist inside me. "Mom, I don't care about any of that," I said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "What matters is that Jacob and I love each other." The words came easily, but as soon as they left my mouth, a shadow of doubt slipped in. I remembered those moments over the past year that hadn't made sense. The times he didn't answer my calls until hours later, claiming he was busy. The quick way he'd slide his phone back into his pocket whenever I walked into the room. The late nights with friends, always the same excuse. And then there was the way he said, "I love you." Or rather the way he never said it first, always in response, never as an offering. Instead, he'd grin and call me sunshine, as if pet names could replace real words. I shook my head at the memory, chiding myself for inventing problems where none existed. After all, he had proposed, hadn't he? He had planned this wedding. He was going to stand with me tomorrow in front of God and everyone we knew. Still, that nervous flutter wouldn't let go of my chest. I tried to tell myself it was normal, that every bride doubted a little the night before. Maybe the trembling hands, the sleepless thoughts, the cold ache in my stomach were all part of the ritual. The phone rang, breaking my spiral. I grabbed it quickly. "Hello, hey sunshine." Jacob's voice was warm, calm, everything I needed to hear. "How's my bride-to-be? Did you like the dress?" I closed my eyes, letting the sound of him wash over me. "It's perfect. I can't wait for tomorrow. And I can't wait to make you my wife," he said softly. "Forever, Claire. Well, have forever." I smiled into the dark, clutching the phone as if it could anchor me. For tonight, his words were enough to quiet the storm, at least for a little while. I couldn't sit still after our call. Jacob's voice had sounded so tender, so reassuring that I wanted nothing more than to see him, to share the joy swelling in me. "Just half an hour," I told my mother as I slipped on a light coat. The evening air in Savannah was soft and fragrant, laced with honeysuckle and the faint salt of the nearby marsh. My heels clicked against the pavement as I cut through the familiar park. Neighbors called out blessings for tomorrow, and I waved, smiling like the luckiest woman alive. His building came into view, the bricks still fresh from recent painting. The sleepy cat curled in the windowsill downstairs. I climbed the steps 2 at a time, heart racing not from nerves, but anticipation. I lifted my hand to knock when Jacob's voice floated through the thin wooden door. "Mom, stop worrying. Everything will be fine." I froze. His tone was calm, confident, the way he spoke when convincing a client. His mother's voice answered, quivering. "Jacob, are you sure about this? About Claire?" I waited for his immediate protest, his declaration of love. Instead, he chuckled low and careless. "I've told you 100 times. Claire is like a sister to me. I've gotten used to her over the years. She's a sweet girl." The word sliced through me. "Sister," my chest tightened, but I stayed rooted to the spot, desperate for him to correct himself. "But do you love her?" his mother pressed. Jacob laughed outright, a sound that made my blood run cold. "Love, Mom, is for storybooks. In real life, you have to us your head. You've seen what her parents are giving us. The downtown condo, the car, the money, and her father's connections at City Hall. Priceless. This marriage is security, not romance." The world tilted beneath me. The banister dug into my palm as I gripped it for balance. Every tender smile, every whispered promise, every time he'd brushed my hair from my face. It all cracked like cheap glass. His father's voice joined in, steady and approving. "She'll make a good wife. Polite, respectable from the right family. You're making the right choice." Jacob's next words shattered what little strength I had left. "Besides, Samantha Brooks is back in town. Remember her? We were happy together once. With her, I can have passion. With Claire, I get stability. Best of both worlds." Samantha, the name roared in my ears. I remembered her vaguely. Dark hair, older than us, the kind of girl who turned heads in high school. She had been gone for years, and now she was back, sliding seamlessly into the space where my heart had once belonged. Jacob's voice lowered, intimate, but still clear through the door. "I am meeting her tomorrow morning before the ceremony, just to settle things between us." That was enough. My body moved before my mind could catch up. Heels clicking too loud as I fled down the stairwell. My vision blurred with tears, my breath coming in shallow gasps. 3 years of believing, 3 years of building dreams on sand. Sister, Dar, Samantha, the words hammered against my skull. By the time I stumbled into the cool night air, the truth had rooted deep inside me. Jacob hadn't loved me at all. Every moment we'd shared had been nothing but a calculated act, and my fairy tale had just ended at his doorstep. I don't remember how I made it back across town. One minute, I was standing outside Jacob's door with my heart in shreds. The next, I was stumbling into my bedroom, the glow of my wedding gown spilling from the half-open closet like a cruel reminder of what tomorrow was supposed to be. My mother asked if I was all right, her voice warm and concerned. I forced a smile, muttered something about being tired, and slipped past her before she could see my trembling hands. The house was quiet, but inside me chaos reigned. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, as every moment of the last 3 years replayed in brutal clarity. The way Jacob had taken me to meet his parents far too quickly. Had it been romance or strategy, the questions he'd asked about my father's work, his thinly veiled curiosity about the apartment deed, the savings account, the car, the way he'd avoided saying I love you first, letting me feed him the words and echoing them back with a smile that in hindsight felt rehearsed. How had I been so blind? I had built castles out of sand, convinced myself they were made of stone. For hours I lay there, caught between two unbearable choices. I could keep silent, marry him, and preserve my family's honor. The guests would smile. The photographs would hang on our walls. My parents would hold their heads high in Savannah society. But I would know. I would wake each morning beside a man who calculated my worth like a ledger, who whispered passion to another woman, while telling me I was like a sister. The alternative was worse in its own way, walking away, breaking my parents' hearts, ruining months of preparation, shaming the Mitchell name before the entire town. My mother's proud smile in the bridal salon, my father's meticulous plans, it would all collapse because of me. Near midnight, I dragged myself to the mirror. The woman staring back was pale, eyes swollen, lips trembling. I looked less like a bride and more like a ghost. And yet, behind the ruin, something flickered. A stubborn spark that whispered I was worth more than a bargain struck in the dark. By 4 a.m, I could no longer lie still. I opened the closet, touched the wedding dress one last time, then turned away. I pulled out a small travel bag and packed only what mattered. My passport, some money, the envelope I had saved for the honeymoon. My hands shook as I scribbled a note. Mom, Dad, forgive me. I can't explain everything now, but I can't go through with this wedding. I love you, Claire. As dawn broke, I placed a note on my pillow and stood for a long moment in the doorway of my childhood room. My heart was breaking, but beneath the devastation, a fragile strength was rising. I could not marry Jacob Whitfield. I would not. The sky was still bruised with the last shadows of night when I slipped out the front door. My shoes barely whispered against the porch steps as I carried the small travel bag that felt heavier with every stride. Behind me, the house slept in silence. My parents dreamed of a daughter walking down the aisle. Not one fleeing into the dawn. The streets of Savannah were nearly empty. A milk truck rattled by, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled 6. I kept my eyes forward, clutching the handle of my bag as though it were the only anchor I had left. The bus station smelled of diesel and coffee. Its fluorescent lights hummed as I walked up to the counter. 1 ticket to Atlanta. I managed, my voice trembling. The cashier didn't ask questions, just slid the paper stub across the counter. Departure 8:0 a.m. 2 hours. Enough time for Jacob to meet Samantha at their old spot. Enough time for my parents to discover the note on my pillow. My stomach turned at the thought. I stepped outside, searching for a quiet corner. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and dialed Hannah. She answered groggy, her voice thick with sleep. Claire, what on earth? There's no wedding. I cut in. Hannah, please listen. Tell my parents I'm safe, but I can't marry Jacob. There was a stunned pause. Claire, what are you talking about? Did something happen? I can't explain right now. Just make sure they know I'm alive. My throat tightened. I'm sorry. I have to go. I hung up before her questions could pin me down. The guilt came in waves, my mother's tears, my father's fury, the shame they would feel when guests arrived to an empty altar. My whole life they had given me everything. And this was how I repaid them. By running, by destroying the day they had so carefully built. Yet another voice rose inside me, firmer, stronger. How could I stay? How could I vow forever to a man who loved someone else, who saw me only as a transaction? To marry Jacob would have been the greater betrayal, not just of myself, but of the family who raised me to value honesty. When the bus doors finally opened, I climbed aboard, my chest tight with fear. The seats smelled faintly of vinyl and dust. I slid into one by the window and pressed my forehead to the glass. As Savannah rolled away, my reflection stared back. A runaway bride with no plan beyond the next smile. I was terrified of poverty, of loneliness, of being swallowed by a city that didn't know my name. But beneath the fear was something sturdier, almost defiant. I had chosen truth over deception. Whatever waited for me in Atlanta, at least it would be real. The bus rumbled north, each mile carrying me farther from the life I'd known. I pressed my forehead against the glass, watching the low country fade into pine forests. My phone buzzed. Hannah's name lit up the screen. My stomach nodded before I answered. "Claire, what did you do?" Her voice was frantic, low, as if she had ducked into a hallway to keep from being overheard. "Your parents found the note at 7 this morning. Your mom is beside herself. Your dad. He nearly called the police before I told him you were safe." I swallowed hard, unable to picture their faces without a stab of guilt. "Hannah, I couldn't marry him." "I know, but the guests are arriving, Claire. They're all dressed, gifts in hand, waiting at the restaurant. Jacob's there too. He's telling everyone you're sick." But she hesitated. "People are whispering. The neighbors are saying you ran away." The words struck like a hammer. Ran away. That was exactly what I had done. In Savannah, news traveled faster than wildfire. By sunset, the entire town would know. Hannah's voice cracked. "Your mother was crying so hard she couldn't finish a sentence. And your dad." He kept pacing, saying, "She wouldn't do this without a reason." Jacob looked pale as a ghost, Claire. He tried to laugh it off, but no one believed him. I closed my eyes, letting her words paint the scene I would never see. The table set with flowers and china, the musicians waiting with instruments in hand, 40 guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. My parents forced to stand in front of them with nothing but a crumpled note. And Jacob, cornered by whispers, his perfect reputation slipping away as neighbors leaned close to trade theories. "What are they saying about me?" I asked quietly. "That you got cold feet. That maybe you realize something. Some even say Jacob wasn't as perfect as he seemed." Hannah exhaled sharply. "Claire, this is going to be the scandal of the year." I almost laughed, though the sound caught in my throat. Then let it be. Better a scandal than a lie. The bus hissed to a stop in Atlanta, and the driver called out the station name. I gathered my bag with shaking hands. The city loomed outside, vast and unfamiliar, humming with a life that didn't know me or my story. By afternoon, while Savannah feasted on gossip, I was handing cash to a landlady in a faded bathrobe for a tiny rented room on the edge of town. A single bed, a cracked dresser, and a window overlooking a crooked oak tree. It was nothing like the life I had been promised, but it was mine, and it was honest. The first night in Atlanta passed in a blur of exhaustion and nerves. I lay on the narrow bed of my rented room, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the muffled hum of traffic outside. By morning, the reality hit me. I had no plan, no connections, no safety net. The only work I'd ever done was in my father's office, answering phones, filing documents, a job handed to me because of his position. Out here, none of that mattered. I forced myself into the streets with a borrowed newspaper tucked under my arm, circling classifieds like someone who knew what she was doing. But every posting seemed to require experience I didn't have. My savings meant for honeymoons suddenly looked like a fragile lifeline that could vanish in weeks. An internet cafe caught my eye, its windows fog from the heat of old computers. Inside, a college kid with headphones showed me how to search job sites and fill out applications. My fingers hovered awkwardly over the keyboard as I tried to craft a resume that sounded more substantial than it was. 3 years of administrative assistant under my father's name. Would anyone in this city take that seriously? I sent out resume after resume, heart pounding with each click of the mouse. By the 10th, my palms were slick with sweat. I felt like an imposter wearing borrowed clothes, a child pretending to be an adult. 2 days later, The phone in my tiny room rang. A woman's brisk voice introduced herself from a marketing firm downtown. "We received your application. Can you come in tomorrow for an interview?" My breath caught. Yes, of course. The next morning, I stood in front of a glass building that seemed to scrape the sky. My knees nearly gave out as I crossed the lobby, clutching the strap of my borrowed handbag. In the mirrored elevator, I caught sight of myself, neatly pressed blouse, hair pulled into a careful bun, makeup hiding the shadows under my eyes. I looked the part, but inside terror clawed at me. The interview room was sleek, intimidating. Across the table sat a woman in a navy suit, her pen poised above a notepad. "Tell me about your experience." My throat dried. I spoke about handling clients, about organizing schedules, half true, half stretched. But I forced the words out steadily, even when my hands shook beneath the table. When she finally nodded, her tone softened. "We'll start you on a 3-month probation. The salary is modest at first, but if you prove yourself, there's room to grow. Can you begin Monday?" I nearly wept with relief. Yes, absolutely. Walking out of that building, the sunlight felt different, warmer, sharper. It wasn't triumph, not yet. But it was a start. My first fragile victory. And for the first time since I'd left Savannah, I believed I might actually survive here. 3 months passed in a blur of work and exhaustion. I stumbled through the early weeks of my probation, terrified each mistake would expose me as a fraud. But little by little, the fear ebbed. By the end of the 3rd month, my supervisor shook my hand and said, "Welcome to the team." It was the first time in years I felt like I had earned something on my own. That fragile sense of stability shattered the morning Jacob appeared. I had just settled into my small office cubicle when the receptionist buzzed. "There's a man here asking for you." I stepped into the hallway and froze. Jacob stood there in a pressed suit, thinner than I remembered, with a bouquet of white roses, my favorite. His eyes searched mine, uncertain, almost desperate. "Claire," he said softly, as though we were alone in a church instead of a bustling office building. "I had to see you." The air left my lungs. For a moment, I was back at his door in Savannah, listening to the laughter that had gutted me. But I straightened my spine. "How did you find me?" "Your father," he admitted. "It took weeks, but he finally told me. Please just hear me out." We ended up in a quiet conference room. He placed the flowers between us like a peace offering. "I was a fool," he began. "I said things I didn't mean. I thought marriage was about stability, but when you left, I realized what I lost. I love you, Claire." Truly, I felt my jaw tighten. "Stop. I heard every word you said that night. Every single one. I heard you laugh when your mother asked if you loved me. I heard you promise Samantha that you'd meet her on the morning of our wedding." His face went pale. You heard that?" "Yes, and the call. You told her you loved her while you were planning a life with me." My voice was steady now, still beneath the hurt. "So don't stand here and tell me you suddenly love me now that I've walked away." He leaned forward, desperation leaking into his voice. "I was wrong. I thought I could have both, but I swear losing you showed me the truth. I want only you." I shook my head slowly. "No, Jacob. You didn't lose me because you made a mistake. You lost me because you never saw me as more than a convenient purchase. And I deserve more than that." Silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. For the first time, I saw him not as the man who had betrayed me, but as someone small, powerless against the choices he'd made. Later that week, I shared coffee with Roman, a colleague from the marketing team. He didn't bring flowers or grand speeches. He asked how my presentation had gone, listened when I vented about deadlines, and laughed at my nervous jokes. There were no masks with him, no hidden motives, just honesty. Walking back to the office beside him, I realized Jacob no longer had power over me. The past had knocked at my door, and I had finally closed it. A year passed before I set foot in Savannah again. My mother's birthday drew me home, and though the thought of returning filled me with unease, I knew it was time. Atlanta had become my world. Work, friends, a modest but comfortable apartment. but Savannah was still where I belonged to two people who loved me more than anyone. When the train pulled into the station, I spotted my parents waiting. My mother cried when she saw me, clutching me as though I might vanish again. My father held me longer than usual, his silence speaking volumes. They had forgiven me, though scars lingered. That weekend, relatives gathered for a small celebration. Old neighbors eyed me with a mix of curiosity and something else. Respect maybe for the way I had carved out a life after the scandal. Their whispers no longer stung. I had survived them. It was in a quiet cafe the next day that I saw him. Jacob. He stood by the counter holding hands with Samantha Brooks. A wedding ring gleamed on her finger. They looked settled, comfortable, even happy in the way couples sometimes are when they finally got what they wanted. He noticed me first. For a moment, tension flickered in his eyes, but then he managed a polite smile. "Claire," he said softly. Samantha's gaze sharpened, protective. I nodded, calm. "Jacob, Samantha." My voice surprised me with its steadiness. There was an awkward pause before he introduced her as his wife. She extended her hand, and I took it. "Congratulations," I said. "I truly hope you're happy." The words weren't forced. To my surprise, I meant them. The bitterness I once carried had dissolved into something else. Acceptance. What happened between us was finished. A closed chapter that no longer dictated my future. As we parted ways, I walked out into the Savannah sun and felt lighter than I had in years. Seeing him didn't ignite rage or longing. It simply confirmed what I already knew. I had let go. That evening, sitting at my parents' kitchen table with the smell of my mother's peach cobbler drifting through the air, I reflected on the woman I had become. I wasn't the naive girl who once measured her worth by a man's attention. I was someone who had rebuilt herself from nothing, who had chosen truth over comfort, integrity over illusion. Back in Atlanta, my life with Roman unfolded slowly. He never rushed me, never demanded promises I wasn't ready to make. We shared dinners after work, long conversations about our pasts, even comfortable silences. His honesty was his greatest gift, and it built a foundation steadier than any dowry or social standing. As the train carried me back to Atlanta after the visit, I looked out the window at the receding fields and knew I had finally found peace. Savannah was part of my story, but it no longer defined me. The future was mine to write, and for the first time, I trusted myself to write it well. The train slid into Atlanta just as the evening sun turned the skyline gold. From my seat by the window, I watched the glass tower shimmer like beacons, calling me back to the life I had built here. When I stepped onto the platform, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not just for returning to a familiar place, but for knowing that this city, once so foreign and terrifying, was now home. Walking through the crowded station, I thought about the girl who had fled Savannah a year ago, trembling, clutching a single bag, convinced she was destroying everything her parents had given her. That girl had believed she was a coward, a runaway. But standing here now, steady on my own 2 feet, I understood the truth. She wasn't running from responsibility. She was running toward freedom. At my apartment, the key turned easily in the lock. The small living room, the second-hand couch, the kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee grounds, it all carried the weight of my effort, my choices. For the first time in my life, everything around me was mine. Not because of family connections or dowries, but because I had earned it. My parents had embraced me during my visit, and the guilt I carried for so long had softened. They loved me, even if they hadn't understood me at first. They had given me roots, but I had given myself wings. That night, Roman stopped by with takeout in his hands and his usual easy smile. He never tried to dazzle me with grand gestures. Instead, he offered something Jacob never had: honesty. We ate on the couch, shoulder to shoulder, laughing over stories from work. At one point, he reached for my hand, and I didn't pull away. Not because I felt obligated, not because anyone expected it, but because I wanted to. It struck me then how different this love was from the one I had nearly chained myself to. Roman wasn't a calculation, a trade, or a performance. He was simply a man who chose me and whom I chose back. No masks, no bargains, justice. Before bed, I stood at the window watching the city lights burn against the night sky. My reflection in the glass looked calm, almost radiant. I thought of the dress, still hanging in my childhood closet, unworn. Once it had symbolized everything I thought I needed. Now it was only fabric. The real gown I wore was made of the choices I had stitched together with trembling hands and stubborn courage. People might still whisper that I was the bride who ran. Let them. I knew better. I wasn't a runaway. I was a woman who refused to live a lie. My escape wasn't madness. It was courage. And because of that, my future at last was real.